welcome you all. It's good to see and hear you all in these troubled times, I would say. For those of you who are not so familiar with ILA, so ILA is the Luxembourg Institute of Directors. We aim to promote best practices in governance in Luxembourg. I have the honor of chairing the institute, and today with me is Luc Frieden. So Luc is a partner with the Luxembourg law firm Elvinger Haas. You probably all know Luc. He's also the chairman of the Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce, and he's the chairman of the board of Banque Internationale à Luxembourg, so most commonly known as BIL. But prior to all of these roles that Luc has today, Luc has been for many years the Luxembourg Minister of Justice and the Minister of Finance. So a lot of experience as a leader in different positions that Luc will be able to share with us this morning. Now I do see Monique back.
Yes, I'm back. Hopefully I stay. Sorry, I've been in and out about 50 times this morning. So I hope it stabilizes. I shut everything down and restarted, so hopefully that makes a difference. So you're in the middle of the introduction, so keep going.
No, I just introduced ILA a little bit. I introduced Luc as a speaker and hand it back to you. Then maybe you want to introduce the topic and a few just housekeeping rules on how we run this session.
Yeah. So Carine, I don't know if she introduced herself, but Carine obviously is the chair of ILA. She's a Luxembourg attorney and a certified independent director.
Okay, so let's move over to the topic. Yes, I think you heard the most important. That's what Monique had to say about myself. So let's move over to the topic of today, is about how boards can and should lead in terms of a crisis. That's what we are in today. We have been in the midst of a crisis for months now, and it is most likely to continue for a few more weeks. So what is the role of the board in these situations? What is the leadership role of a board? And how should boards be involved in these situations? How should they interact with management? These are a little bit the topics we have on our agenda for today. Monique, I see you back. I haven't gone through the housekeeping rules. So can I ask you to do those quickly and then we get to our first questions?
Yeah, so I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So a few house notes. So this webinar obviously is recorded and it will be available online afterwards. It takes the form of a discussion with our panelists who will touch on various topics and hopefully be a bit interactive. Viewers can ask questions via the chat channel. So please do not unmute yourself, stay on mute, unless we have time at the end to unmute people, but really stay on mute. You can ask questions through the chat function, which you should see at the bottom of your screen, and it'll open a little panel to the right, or depending on your device. Any questions raised, we will try to address, and if we don't, we may follow up in other webinars later. And since my connection seems to be unstable, then Carine, please do keep jumping in if you keep losing me. So let's get started. So great. We have both Luc and Carine who've got a lot of experience in leadership positions, in boards, but in other contexts as well. And Luc, you are chairman of a systemically important bank. Maybe you want to tell us a little bit about your experiences at the moment with the current COVID-19 crisis. What has the board been doing? What do you think they're going to be doing next? Yeah, it'd be great if you could share a little bit about that.
Okay, thank you, Monique. It's nice to see you all. I brought my coffee mug because it's a coffee chat, so I'm not going to lecture you, but just to share with you a little bit what I have been doing, what we have been doing in the board of BIL. And I think the role of the board does not change in a crisis. It fundamentally has to remain cool-headed and look at the bigger picture. So that is true, by the way, always when you are in a crisis. That was true 10 years ago when in the financial crisis, I was Minister of Finance. You have to see, you need to let some people do the daily housekeeping, and you need to be the one who looks at the major challenges that the country, or in this case, the company, is facing. And so you need to see first, where is the best place for you to be at that moment? I can tell you that I left the bank already 3 weeks ago because we had discussed the situation that the CEO and the chairman should not fall ill at the same time. So the first thing that we decided long before the confinement was that I had to leave the bank. And as I had another office in my law firm, I did not go back to the bank. So that allowed me to stay at home or to be outside the bank and to make sure that not everybody would fall sick at the same time. Secondly, we applied the same rule rather quickly thereafter to the management board, where we decided that the management board should also not sit all together in the same building. Now, in a bank, of course, you have a quite awkward situation because on the one hand, you need to make sure that the bank is running and continues to run without interruption. So the business continuity. And on the other hand, you have to make sure that your people are protected. So I felt it also as my duty as chairman, together, by the way, with the board, and I come back to that, to make sure that in this dilemma of continue to work while going home and protecting your staff, the right decisions would be taken by the management. In general, I feel that the role of the chairman, and to a lesser extent the board, is always to be a coach to the management board. And so I call the management every day since the beginning of the crisis, and they have to report to me on the major actions they take. And the first one was indeed to split the bank into 3 different locations. And in the second phase, like most companies, to send quite a number of people home and to make sure that the whole IT would work so that they could work from home. So a role of making sure that those 2 objectives, continuity on the one hand and safety, are implemented. Of course, the implementation is the role of the management, but the board and the chairman in particular should make sure that these 2 objectives are achieved. Secondly, in that situation, I called an extraordinary board meeting because the bank indeed is a normal company on the one hand, but at the same time it is of course impacted quite substantially, or might be impacted quite substantially by what's happening in the financial markets, what's happening with the clients, because some clients, especially at the beginning, were panicking. Some thought they should get the money out of the bank, others thought they should sell all their shares and so on. So also to make sure again that we would have at an early stage, we in the board would have at an early stage a view on how this could impact the bank. Obviously nobody has the answer, but the mere fact of calling a special board meeting where management could report and where we could discuss certain possible impacts on the bank, I think was important. In that context, I also said that I wanted a weekly report from management to the board, which we didn't have in the past, but you know, as a systemically relevant bank, but also as a retail bank in Luxembourg, as a bank that is supporting quite a lot of Luxembourg-based companies that are affected by this crisis, the impact on us is or can be quite important. So we get now a written report on a weekly basis, all members of the board, on how many moratoria were granted for Luxembourg-based companies, what is the situation with the liquidity in the bank, what are the number of new loans being applied for that are related to COVID-19. So in other words, to keep a continuous overview of the financial impact. So it's the business continuity, safety of the people, the financial impact. I think these are the three topics. But again, I come back to what I said at the beginning. A lot of people in the bank, and that's quite natural, they are doing the day-to-day work. So they are a little bit panicked. And it's our role, I think, as a board, and in particular as chairman of the board, to make sure that these people do not lose sight of the bigger picture, to tell them sometimes, to reassure them, also to tell them that that has been well done, but that they should not forget that the normal business also continues. And therefore, I would like to add in that context that I called also yesterday a board meeting on a completely different topic, something that we had been on that was on our minds for a long time, particularly what we are going to do in Asia and in China, which was something that we had on our business strategy for the coming 5 years. And I said, let's sometimes just get out of the panic, get out of the daily stress, also to keep focusing on the long term, because the role of the board is also to make sure that after the crisis, however long it will take, our companies continue to implement the strategy that they are working on. And so that was quite refreshing that we had yesterday a WebEx meeting for 3 hours on a completely different topic, and some of the board members and the management afterwards said, wow, we are so happy that we dealt with something else than COVID-19. So maybe that I launch it like that, and then we can, while we are discussing, come back to some of the points or add some of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that you're looking forward, and I think we'll come back to that theme afterwards. But your bank is not only regulated by the CSSF, it's also systemic. So you have oversight from the European Central Bank. How does that affect, how your board might be reacting or having to do supplementary reporting or other aspects?
Indeed, we are monitored, supervised by the European Central Bank and the single supervisory mechanism. And the other difference, of course, is that we are one of the rare Luxembourg-based banks that does not have a mother company that is also a bank. The shareholders of BIL are the Luxembourg state and a Chinese conglomerate, which is not a bank. So therefore, all the strategic decisions of the bank are not taken at the level of the mother company, but are taken in Luxembourg. And we are directly reporting to the ECB joint supervisory team. So I took contact with the ECB and also make sure that they would get all the information that they needed from us. In the meantime, they introduced a weekly call with the management board. So I leave that to the management board, but at the same time, I have some contact with them because I know from the crisis in 2008 that what is extremely important is for the supervisor and the central bank to have a general view on the flows of funds between the various financial institutions and of possible hits that some of the institutions might take. And therefore, I believe it's extremely important to keep that dialogue going. And I must say, I talk both to the CSSF and to the ECB to make sure that they have every information on hand. And we agreed that we would, on regular intervals, have a phone call to discuss the impact. Again, we are a bank, and this time it's the real economy that is hit. But in the second round, of course, the banks may be hit because if companies cannot reimburse their loans, or if people want to get out of funds and so on, that of course has an impact on the financial sector, especially in the coming months. So we have to have a very close monitoring at the bank's level, but also the reporting to the supervisors.
Thanks, Luke. Carine, you sit on some other types of boards outside of banking, some who are smaller, investment funds, insurance, a diverse mix. And maybe you can share a little bit of what's been happening on these boards. What have they been doing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot of what Luc said, you also find those topics back in other boards which are not systemically relevant banks. I think Luc mentioned three main items. One is business continuity. The second is the staff, taking care of your staff, making sure they are safe, they are at home or in different locations where they can work from. And then obviously the financial impact that the situation has on the company. So those three aspects, you see them to a different level in other companies, because obviously you have a large number of companies in Luxembourg where there is no staff. If you're looking at investment funds, you sit on the board of a fund has no staff itself. So that part somehow goes away, but on the other hand, the business continuity is there. You have to make sure the fund keeps running, and therefore you have to make sure that your service providers have a BCP in place that's working. So you need, as a board of a fund, to make sure that the various service providers you have continue to work normally and will be able to calculate the NAV and provide all the services that the fund needs on a daily, weekly or monthly basis. Then you have other companies in Luxembourg that are not allowed currently to operate, to function. So the business continuity aspect totally goes away because these companies are not allowed to continue their business. Take, for example, a construction company or a large retail shopping company or even a smaller one, but that might not have an independent member on its board. But those companies, you have completely different issues that you need to deal with today, notably the financial aspect, the financial consequences of the situation, the staff that you need to send home, but not with a purpose of working, but just being away from the business. So depending on the type of company, activity, staff questions, business questions, the topics will have more of a focus on one of the three aspects or the other. I think what's important in any situation is that the board is there to support management, that the board shows that it is available to help management, that the board communicates with management, whether it's on a daily, weekly, but on a very, very regular basis, much more often than in normal circumstances. And I think what I have experienced over the last months is that board members are extremely available. I have one board where we have in our calendar now a daily placeholder for a call. We're not using it every day, but there is an hour blocked every day in our calendar for a call of the board if we need it. And none of the board members has not been available for any of these calls when needed. So I think that's our role. It's the role of the board to step in, to do more in these times of crisis than in usual times. And what I have seen so far in Luxembourg, I think has been extremely positive in terms of how the governance is running in these times.
Great.
I agree with Carine. I said at the beginning of this conversation that the role of the board doesn't change. What changes indeed is the frequency of the interaction both among the board members on the one hand and with management on the other hand. At least in the experience that I have in the bank. By the way, also on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, I think it's extremely important that that you are available, because I also feel that management likes that. Without interfering too much in what management does, I think there is a real need for them, for the CEO in particular, maybe also for the head of HR and for the CFO, sometimes to be, as you said, Carine, to be supported. I would also add to be challenged in some of the things that they are doing, because they are functioning in uncharted waters. This is an environment that they don't know. Nobody knows it actually. So it's sometimes good if there's somebody outside who can say, well, I think this is okay, or you are doing a good job, or maybe this goes too far. So that is something that also is the role of the board. And therefore, I think we have to set, like in normal times, to set the strategy, to supervise and to coach. And maybe the coaching role, the supporting role is more important in the crisis than in normal times.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously with the boards, they have some key, annual timelines coming up. The AGMs, financial reporting, and these have got their own special challenges right now. What are your boards or your companies doing to react to that? Maybe Luke first.
Okay, well, indeed, that's a real issue, because in many companies, the general meeting of shareholders takes place during this time of the year. As many of you in this coffee chat know, the Luxembourg Parliament adopted a law that provides for a new system of holding general meetings of shareholders during this crisis. In a nutshell, you can force shareholders to vote in writing. You can force them to send in a proxy to a given person, or you can do your shareholders meeting by video conference. In my bank, we decided, because we have also a number of small shareholders, we decided to ask them, to impose on them actually, that they had to vote in writing. So our general meeting of shareholders is next week, and we sent to them the whole documentation and with the written resolutions where they can say yes, no, or abstain. And so there will be no physical meeting, but there will also be no video conference, because we saw that would be, from a technical point of view, too difficult to arrange, because some of these small shareholders are living in different countries. We are not sure whether they are connected or how we could connect to all of them. So we know who they are, but so this is the way we are handling this. It's something new, certainly, but I think it's a very good piece of legislation that was adopted for a quite special situation where physical presence of people is not possible.
Yeah, and what about the report? You said you're sending them the package with all of the documentation for the shareholder meeting. That obviously includes the financial statements, the director's report. What is different, or what has been more challenging this year?
Well, I think that's more or less as it was in the past. They can ask for all the documents, so we write to them and we give them an access to a website where they can have all the documents available like in the past. And if need be, we can also send them to them with normal mail for those who have not the technical equipment. But so I think that will not fundamentally change. What I will probably do is also, next to the normal management report and the board report that we make to the shareholders, I might write to them an additional letter with more comments on what has been going on, what I usually do during the physical meeting, because there I make a speech, I give an introduction. So this time I might add a personal letter to the shareholders whom we don't see that often. And then obviously I have to say that the two largest shareholders, I talked about this, also about the form of the meeting. Again, that is the Minister of Finance on the one hand, and the Chinese conglomerate Legend Holdings on the other hand. So with them, obviously I talked already during the past few days quite frequently, and I will do so also prior to the general meeting of shareholders, because obviously these are the key shareholders, but we should never forget the small shareholders who also play, like in every company that has minority shareholders. They should also be respected and have full access to all the information that they need to exercise their rights.
I think that this piece, the piece of legislation that Luc refers to, is indeed extremely useful for the large companies like Bill or SAS has already used it also, because they have had their shareholders meeting already, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and others will be using it as well in the weeks to come. But for the large companies that have a lot of shareholders, diverse shareholders, but not to forget that in Luxembourg we do have a lot of companies that are 100% subsidiaries of foreign entities, where you don't have the same issues, because there the shareholders meeting is being held this year like all other years with a proxy from the only shareholder. I think it's an important piece of legislation for the large companies, but also for the ASBLs that we shouldn't forget, because we have large not-for-profit associations in Luxembourg. And ILA itself is looking at this piece of legislation to see how we will be organizing our own annual meeting, which is scheduled at the end of May, but also the other large associations to whom we talk will be using that piece of legislation to have a remote general meeting this year.
Okay, thank you. And what about the other aspects? You touched on earlier liquidity, particularly for those companies which have closed down, who may not be earning money in the same way at the moment. What have you been seeing in terms of dividends or variable remuneration, share buybacks, those types of discussions at the moment in order to manage the cash versus perhaps making profits?
Well, as far as the banks are concerned, in particular the systemically relevant banks, the answer is quite easy to give, because the European Central Bank and the European Banking Authority issued a guideline which says that you cannot pay dividends this year, at least not until October, when hopefully we get a clearer picture on what's going on, and to make sure that the banks do not distribute money that they might need thereafter. This is, of course, a quite substantial interference into the normal working of a company, because it's an outside person who decides what shareholders can do with the profit of the company. But we understand that, and obviously the bank I'm sharing, but also the other banks, they will not pay dividends, at least not for now, and we'll see how the situation evolves. That is the one aspect. So on dividends, quite clear. The EBA also issued recommendations not to pay out too much variable remuneration right now. I must say we did not discuss that issue so far, although I'm sitting also on the remuneration committee of the bank. I saw that that's not really an issue right now. It's anyway a much smaller amount than dividends in general. So I think we leave that for later in the year or for next year. I think it's, at least in my experience, this has not played a role now. And then finally on liquidity, obviously in a bank, that's key. 10 years ago, that was the beginning of the problem. So we are monitoring, like our supervisors, the liquidity on a daily basis. So far, I think there is no alarming situation there, but that is something that has to be monitored closely. As I said before, if companies do not reimburse their loans, obviously that has an impact. If people withdraw their money, that has an impact. But so far, there was no spectacular negative movements that we could notice there, but that's something that we are monitoring on a daily basis, and that's key to make sure that out of the economic crisis, no financial crisis follows. And that is something that, that will keep us busy in the coming months, especially if the lockdown takes too long in some jurisdictions.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a question of great uncertainty for many businesses. How long will sort of the immediate crisis last, and how long, until we get to some sort of, business as usual, even if it's in a different business as usual to what we experienced before.
Can I just add to that, however,
yeah.
that the banks play an important role to make sure that the liquidity, the cash flow of the real economy is maintained. And that's why the 6 banks that are active in the financing of SMEs in Luxembourg all agreed with the government that they would grant moratoria on outstanding debt for Luxembourg SMEs. And I think that makes sure that those companies, which is the real economy, can survive in the short term, next to the short-term working benefits, the chômage partiel, and this moratoria on loans. I think that makes it possible for quite a number of companies to survive this lockdown. And there, the banks play an important role to make sure that the liquidity of the other companies, of the clients of the banks, can continue to exist during this difficult period.
Yeah, which is an important question then about how to allocate resources. And so the bank's obviously helping the companies a little bit with that by easing some of the pressures. But companies also have to balance, different things. As I said, the timing, how long is this going to last? Different stakeholders who they may have to balance different interests and even public expectations. So Luc, the Chamber of Commerce and the government have come out with various measures. And I believe that you have certain views on, the economy and what might come next. It was really interesting to hear that your board has already been having discussions about, strategy going forward, not just the knee-jerk risk management-y types of meetings. So maybe you can just share a little bit about the big picture of where you think, we're going next.
Well, obviously, like in any crisis, it's very difficult to know exactly what is going to happen. But there are, however, some common features with what happened in previous crises. And what we saw in 2008, where the banking crisis started, the biggest hit on the economy was actually not in 2008, but in 2009. And I think that could very well happen this time as well, because this crisis, which is a global crisis, will impact different countries and different regions of the world in different stages. As Luxembourg is a very open economy, we may get hit from different shocks coming from different parts of the world. So I do not expect this, even if the lockdown is lifted, and it will be lifted as of next week in different stages, hopefully, that will nevertheless still have an impact on us as we are such an open economy. On the other hand, as we are not dependent on just on one region of the world, even if we are impacted over a longer period, we may benefit of the relaunch of the economy on some places, while others will at that time be in a total crisis mood. I also think that the measures taken by the various governments, including the Luxembourg government, were the right measures at this moment in time, because they make sure that companies do not file for bankruptcy during the crisis. I think that's the whole spirit of this short-term working or partial unemployment benefits, to make sure that people don't lose their jobs, and then companies will not disappear during the 2 months or 1.5 months or 3 months of lockout, depending on which sectors they are in. So, and the third thing is that I think that previous crises showed us that we manage as a community to get out of this. States that have quite strong financial positions, where the public finances are in a rather good shape, such as Luxembourg, which always had the AAA rating, I think they can intervene massively in a short period of time, and they can get out of the crisis, provided they also afterwards support the economy to make sure that they can develop in a better way after crisis. And that is something where we have to work on on that in the coming months to make sure that measures are being taken to allow the economy to flourish after the crisis. And that is a combination of aspects about which we have to think and discuss that. It's not easy, but that is possible. And that's what we showed after the steel crisis in the 70s, which impacted Luxembourg in a substantial manner, and what we managed to do also after the financial crisis. So there's hope at the end and light at the end of the tunnel.
Good. That sounds a little bit optimistic. So which is great to have some positive notes in these times. But it does bring to the question, I mean, obviously it's going to be a challenge that it sounds like this is going to restart in a little bit of stop, start, you know, not a very linear fashion. And obviously we are very dependent on what's happening internationally. In terms of key vulnerabilities, I mean, a lot has been talked about things like supply chain disruptions in industry, and you know there might be pieces that are missing. Carine, on your boards, are you seeing strategic opportunities, strategy committees being activated as well, and maybe wider strategic opportunities? For example, you know, we've talked a lot about ESG in the past, and this, you know, the social side has come very much to the fore in this crisis. Are you seeing any changes yet in those discussions, or are they sort of just starting to be kicked off now?
I think those discussions are starting now, because so far, this first month or so, people were really focusing on doing the right thing that needs to be done right now. So nobody was really focusing on the future. But these discussions are starting now with the thought of, you know, having a committee, not just a crisis committee for the current situation, but having a post-crisis committee. So to start thinking about what's coming next and what is the strategic positioning of the company for what's coming next. Now, obviously, the big challenge in those thinkings is that you don't know when is post-crisis, and you don't know how post-crisis is going to look like. So it's, you know, navigating in the dark and trying to find your way. I agree with Luc. I also like to be optimistic for the future, and I know that Luxembourg as a country and as an economy will come out of this maybe easier than other countries and economies. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact that the situation is going to have and how long it can last until we're going back to a sort of normal. And what is that normal going to look like? How long is it going to take, for example, until people start traveling again and start traveling like they used to do? That might take years, I believe. I think I was reading somewhere that the largest economy worldwide is travel and tourism, and that collapsed overnight. And it might take years until that industry is back up and people start moving again. So I think these Zoom and WebEx tools, we will be stuck with them for quite some time for our board meetings, but also for the economy as a whole, until people start, you know, going back into a room again and with a lot of people and living as normal. And that will have an impact on the economy, and that will have an impact on how the country evolves and our lives evolve. Yeah. But coming back to your question on ESG, you know, I think that's a very interesting topic, and a number of people have said, well, how come, you know, humanity is able to take so drastic steps to protect our health, but we're not able to do the same to protect our planet. So you can have very philosophical discussions about what impact this current situation might have on the whole ESG reflections, when I focus now on the E, environmental. Yeah. Regarding the S, the more social component, I think what we are going through now will also have an impact on how people live and work for the future. I think distance working, home working will be a bigger part of our lives in the future. I had a lawyer from a large London firm on the phone recently. He said, we have a building of 800 lawyers in central London. we're already thinking of having that down. So having a building just for 400 people and having the other working from home and coming in just maybe 2 days a week instead of 5-6 days a week. So I think we will see some changes from that perspective, I'm convinced.
Yeah, I might just take one or two of the questions out of the chat. I'm not sure that really all of them can be answered today. There's one about how will we manage performance when everybody's at home. Maybe we'll pick that up another time. But there is also a question about the branding impact. So going back to the ESG and the branding of the management, the company, the board as well by association, in relation to employees, public, and how they are reacting. I mean, obviously there's a lot of measures here in Luxembourg to protect employees, to stave off insolvency. You're seeing, opposite in other countries. I'll tie that with another question, which is where do boards and management, are they aware of cultural changes and traditional to work in the office to staying at home, and how are boards tying that all together? So in terms of work from home, branding of how they're reacting, so the public opinion, and so on.
Yes, if I may start there. By the way, all these questions, which I try to look at the same time, are extremely interesting. Just on performance, I would like to say that I think that in this crisis, you see also who is committed to the company, in the sense that quite extraordinary things were done. And I called some of these people of the management and I asked them to convey that message of gratitude to their teams, because to manage to split our companies, to organize this home working, people connecting to their headquarter in a different manner. So I see quite a number of extraordinary people, not only in IT, but also those who apply this new technology, which they are not used to apply in that sense every day. I think this can be a factor of performance that is being taken into account. Performance next year, in my view, should not be only achieving financial targets, because they may not be able to be achieved, but how you reacted in the crisis, what you did in the crisis, that you were there while not being there. I think that I saw extraordinary movement of helping each other, of being committed to the company, of trying to do work from elsewhere. So I think that should be taken into account. On the branding, I think branding is, of course, not what is the first concern in the crisis, but I think the way you behave will have an impact on whether people want to work with you also in the future, what you do to protect your staff, what you do in society. My bank, like other companies, ordered masks and clothes from China and to give that to hospitals in Luxembourg. So we feel we have a role to play in society, the way we will act vis-à-vis our clients, whether we are there for our clients or not, how we handle them. I think this is the broader branding that certainly from a board perspective, we encourage management to take. And I would add, Monique, if I may, one question that I saw also on the chat was on diversity on the board. I think, like always, diversity, and I'm not only talking of gender diversity, diversity in these situations is also quite important. I'm also speaking particularly here of professional diversity and of geographical diversity, because when we discussed in the board the impact, the possible impact of the coronavirus on the bank, it was quite interesting to have people from different continents, from different regions in the world, who told us how they behave in the crisis, what they did in the crisis, and certainly the fact, as I have some Chinese board members, that they could share with us what they went through from December to February, because they are more or less coming back to normal. So they told us what they did in the company, what has been done in the country. And so to discuss with them was extremely useful. We have somebody who lives in Spain. We have different perspectives. So the diversity, I think, is also in the crisis. Gender, professional, and geographical diversity very helpful and very positive for the board thinking.
Carine, want to add to some of that?
No, I fully agree. I think it's important, as always, to have different perspectives. And I think Luc is very fortunate to have some Chinese board members, because obviously they have gone through the whole process earlier than us. There's also a different culture, maybe, yes, but still, I think that must have been extremely useful.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the questions about boards and management brings me back to part of the discussion early on about, you know, the role of the boards in supporting the CEO, in supporting the staff and the management generally. You know, I mean, obviously this can lead to blurred lines. And, you know, do we simply just have to accept that at the moment, you know, boards should lean in a bit more and the lines might be a little bit more blurred? Or how do you think boards should be dealing with that aspect?
That's a difficult one, even outside of the crisis, at least
Yes.
for myself. And I would like to hear also Carine's views on that. I often think that I go too far, but I'm very critical with myself here, because I feel that if there's a crisis, I can not just sit back and relax, but I have to do a maximum of work. And so I have to watch out not to step in as a second CEO. Fortunately, I'm always on good terms with the CEO, so I think I hope he appreciates my omnipresence. But obviously, I let them being the management board, to do the daily work. It's not me who decides who should sit on that side or on that side, on that location. So obviously the daily management is for them to do, but I step in quite actively to make sure that that I think things are running as I think they should be. I also have to tell you that there is also outside the crisis, for me, one argument that makes me being more active than others. First of all, as I said, because we have no mother company, which is a bank. And secondly, vis-a-vis the regulator. And by law, we are responsible for quite a number of issues. And so if things go wrong, people will say, where was the board? And I saw that in the past, also in the financial crisis. I saw that in some of the files in my law firm, where afterwards people say, well, this would have been the responsibility of the board. And therefore, being board member, as many on this chat know, it's not sufficient nowadays just to attend the board meetings and in between to do nothing. And so I think the responsibility of the board members, in particular in financial institutions, has increased over the past 10 years. And that leads me to be, next to my character, of being more active than maybe chairpersons 20 years ago. But I know that not everybody shares that view.
And we have often discussed it, Luc and myself, so that's why we might be smiling on that topic. But yes, it is a challenge. I think it is a real challenge for the board, but for the management also, where is that line between management and board? It's already difficult to set the line in normal times, and I think it gets even more difficult in a crisis situation, because, as Luc said, it's also a natural reaction by the board to feel that they need to be more involved and they should be more involved. And I agree, they have to be more involved, but still staying on their side of the line and letting management handle the management that they should be taking care of. But certainly, in terms of a crisis, the board must step up. That is very obvious. And I also agree with what Luc said, that for regulated companies, the role of the board is even bigger, because the expectation of the regulator is bigger on the board. And we have seen that over the past years, how many detailed topics the regulator would expect the board to be in charge of, where in the past we would have said, but this is a daily management topic that management takes care of. This doesn't come to the board, but the regulators do expect that. So in terms of a crisis, we obviously need to make sure that the board is in charge of those topics. And as I said at the beginning, is showing support to the management, is available, is helping, and is asking the right questions. I think that's in some part support, but it's also challenge, making sure we're asking the right question to help management, because they've never been through this situation. We haven't, but they haven't either. So I would say there's probably one exception where the board should be even more involved, and that's when the board feels that the management is failing. And that can be a situation as well in the times we're living, that management is not up to the job. And then it's obviously for the board and for the chairman to step in even more and take charge, give more support to management, because the board feels that the management isn't handling the situation properly.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think obviously one of the key things is that directors should keep, you know, like we are doing here, share their experiences, share what they're seeing on other boards, share what they're hearing from other directors. That itself can be a big help for management. And not forget, of course, that, you know, the management themselves might be in distress. So they might also need some emotional support. It's not just, you know, asking questions and asking for reporting. And I think the other thing I took from that is that boards usually will have more, after the crisis, it'll be easier to explain why you did something but maybe got it wrong than why you did nothing. So perhaps, you know, you're better off stepping up if you're not sure, you know, perhaps just to err on the side of activity rather than inactivity. We are coming to the end. We're running out of time here. So I'm going to start wrapping up this session. I mean, I want to, first of all, just a really big thanks to both Carine and to Luc for this timely discussion. Really, thank you for your insights into how boards and directors can step up to these leadership challenges and roles at this time. For those viewing, the video will be posted online afterwards, as well as a short summary of various key themes that have been discussed. ILA has a new COVID-19 section on the website, so there's various resources which are being posted there. And you're welcome to come to us with new suggestions for articles, for webinars, etc. We're developing a whole slate of different things, and we want it to be interactive. And as I said, you know, it's about sharing experiences, but that includes from you. You know, we love to hear from you. Next week, we will be diving into some of those annual matters a little bit more, particularly with relation to the financial statements, audit committees, and the challenges that there are in relation to the audit, such as valuations, management sign-off, going concern, and related issues, and a nice new guide from ILA on this topic. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today, and see you soon, and take care and stay home. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Stay
Monique.
healthy. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.